Welcome to Congress in Context.
Glad to be here for another one.
Yeah, so how does a room full of politicians literally screaming at each other over the brink of global war simultaneously manage to act as the ultimate local cheerleaders for a high school wrestling team?
It is quite the contrast, isn't it?
It really is. Today we're taking a deep dive into the official congressional record for Wednesday, March 4, 2026. And, our mission here is to synthesize those fiery, high-stakes floor debates with the quiet, super formal extensions of remarks section.
Right, getting the full picture.
Exactly. We want to look at how these massive, dense Washington proceedings actually dictate what happens in your specific neighborhood.
But before we jump into the mechanics of all this, let's set some guardrails for you, the listener.
Definitely needed today.
Yeah, absolutely. Today's record contains highly polarized, politically charged debates. I mean, we are going to be looking at deeply divisive arguments regarding immigration, border security, and military actions involving the Trump administration. So we need to be clear. We are absolutely not taking any political sides today. We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints or policies discussed on this floor. Our role is strictly to act as your objective guides, impartially unpacking the ideas, the arguments, and the parliamentary maneuvers contained in the original source material.
That is exactly right. We are here to read the room and just, figure out how the machine works.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the stack of records from this specific Wednesday, the duality of Congress is just staggering. You have macro-level geopolitical tensions colliding right up against hyper-local neighborhood pride.
It's giving everybody whiplash, honestly.
Totally. So let's unpack this. We have to start with how Congress is handling the physical borders of the nation because, this sets the stage for the intense power struggles we see throughout the rest of the day.
Yeah. The House is locked in a bitter fight over H.R. 7744, which is the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Act for 2026.
And the procedural status here, it really tells you everything you need to know about the current political climate.
Oh, yeah. The House barely managed to pass the rule for its consideration.
Barely.
Yeah. That's HRS 1095 by a razor-thin margin of 211 to 209.
A two-vote margin is about as tight as the math allows before the whole process just derails. So why is this specific rule causing such a massive fracture?
Because an appropriations bill isn't just about abstract policy, right? It's the actual checkbook.
Right. Money talks.
Exactly. So Representative Jack from Georgia argued fiercely for passing this bill, and he framed it entirely around essential services.
Okay, so what was his angle?
His argument was that failing to pass this legislation directly strips funding from the Coast Guard and the TSA. So he's effectively accusing the opposition of crippling the nation's baseline protection.
But the opposition isn't actually arguing against the Coast Guard, right? I mean, Representative Lager-Fernandez from New Mexico and Representative DeLauro from Connecticut, they fault this bill because of what else is bundled into that checkbook.
Right, the fine print.
Yeah, they argued that passing this specific legislation inherently green lights and funds what they termed Trump's ICE cruelty agenda. They are targeting the operational funding for immigration and customs enforcement.
Which is where Representative Hoyer from Maryland injected this fascinating fiscal counterpoint into the debate.
Oh, I loved this part. What did he say?
He pointed out that ICE had already been funded with $150 billion earlier in the year.
Wait, $150 billion already?
Yeah. So his argument was that the current standoff over ICE funding is essentially manufactured. It's an ideological battle being fought over money that has, practically speaking, already been allocated.
That is wild. And that brings up a really interesting parliamentary maneuver that played out during this fight. Representative Lager-Fernandez didn't just want to vote no on the rule.
No, she went for a procedural play.
Exactly. She tried to execute a specific tool called defeating the previous question. She wanted to bring up an entirely different bill, H.R. 7481, which would fund FEMA and the Coast Guard, but strip out the ICE funding. So let me see if I can translate this for the listener. Ordering the previous question seems kind of like a group of friends arguing about where to eat.
Okay. I like where this is going.
Right. So the majority calls for a vote to end the debate right now so they can finally order the pizza. But someone else, in this case, Representative Lager-Fernandez, tries to defeat that motion because they secretly want to keep the debate alive just long enough to suggest tacos instead.
That analogy works perfectly for the surface level, but if we look at the deeper mechanics, it is actually about minority rights in a majoritarian institution.
How so?
Well, the House of Representatives, unlike the Senate, is designed to let the majority party run the table. ordering the previous question is the ultimate weapon for majority efficiency.
It just shuts everything down.
Exactly. It slams the door shut on debate and amendments. By trying to defeat it, the minority party is desperately trying to wedge their foot in the door to force their alternative legislation onto the floor.
Like trying to sneak the taco menu onto the table.
Exactly. But as that 211 to 209 vote showed, the majority held their ground. The door slammed shut, the previous question was ordered, and the original rule passed.
Wow. So the House majority successfully exercised its power to control the domestic border debate.
Yeah.
But that same day, we see a massive pivot.
A huge pivot.
Yeah, the chamber goes from fighting over what to fund domestically to an existential crisis over who actually has the power to act internationally.
Right. We are talking about the war powers debates, specifically H-Con Res 38 in the House and its companion piece, S.J. Res 104 in the Senate.
And what are these aiming to do?
These resolutions aim to direct the president to remove U.S. armed forces from unauthorized hostilities in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Wait, before we get into the actual arguments, I'm a bit confused by the procedural note in the record here.
Sure. What's the note?
In the Senate, it says, a motion to discharge, S.J. Res. 104 failed 47 to 53. What exactly is a motion to discharge, and why does a failed vote of 47 to 53 matter so much?
Oh, it is a critical piece of the puzzle. So in Congress, committees are the ultimate gatekeepers. A bill usually has to be approved by a committee before the full Senate or House can even look at it.
Right, they decide what makes it to the floor.
Exactly. A motion to discharge is essentially a legislative mutiny.
A mutiny.
Yeah. It's an attempt to yank a bill out of a committee's hands, often a committee that is intentionally stalling it, and force it directly onto the floor for a full vote.
Okay, so getting 47 votes means there was significant, almost majority support to bypass the normal gatekeepers and force a debate on removing troops from Iran. But, it ultimately fell short of the 51 votes needed.
So the mutiny failed, but it forced the arguments out into the open anyway. And the clash here is fundamentally about the United States Constitution.
Yeah, a classic separation of powers fight.
Right. Representative Mast from Florida argued that Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president the inherent authority as commander-in-chief to defend the country against imminent threats without needing to wait around for Congress to pass a law. Conversely, Representative Meeks from New York and former Speaker Pelosi from California pushed back incredibly hard on that interpretation.
And their argument was based on Article 1, right?
Exactly. Their stance is that the Constitution places the power to declare war squarely in Article 1 with the legislative branch. They argued that when American lives and taxpayer treasure are on the line, the executive branch cannot unilaterally bypass the deliberative process of Congress.
Okay, let's unpack this because there's a glaring logical tension in the record here.
Let's hear it.
So, Representative Mast openly scoffed at the idea that a 40-year ongoing conflict with Iran couldn't be considered an imminent threat. But if a threat is a constant, unchanging baseline for 4 decades, does the word imminent lose its legal meaning when justifying immediate military action without a vote?
It's a semantic nightmare.
Right. If I say a storm has been imminently arriving for 40 years, you'd eventually stop buying umbrellas.
What's fascinating here is that your question strikes at the eternal tug-of-war built into the American system. The founders explicitly designed the legislative branch to be slow and deliberative, precisely so that the nation doesn't rush into war based on the passions of one person.
Right, it's supposed to be hard to go to war.
Exactly. However, the executive branch consistently argues that the modern geopolitical landscape doesn't afford us the luxury of 18th century deliberation.
Things move too fast now.
Yeah. If a hostile nation operates proxy militias and funds cyber attacks over a 40-year period, the executive argues that the threat isn't just a baseline, it's a powder keg that could ignite at any second.
It is the ultimate tension between the need for executive speed and the duty of legislative oversight.
Truly.
But, it's also a perfect transition point for our analysis of this day in Congress. Because while lawmakers are failing to rein in executive power on the global stage, they are simultaneously trying to wield immense federal power over the most micro-level, localized issue imaginable.
You're talking about the housing market.
A housing market.
Yeah, we see this shift dramatically in the Senate. While the House debated global conflict, the Senate spent the day focused on H.R. 6644, the Housing for the 21st Century Act.
And there was a big amendment here, right?
Yes. The core of this debate revolves around a massive substitute amendment, SA 4308, introduced by a highly unusual bipartisan pairing, Senator Scott of South Carolina and Senator Warren of Massachusetts.
That is an unexpected duo. And you see Senators Thune of South Dakota and McCormick of Pennsylvania heavily involved in this floor debate, too.
Yeah, they were deep in the weeds on this.
The consensus across the aisle seems to be that the American dream of homeownership has basically mathematically evaporated for the middle class, and it's driven almost entirely by a catastrophic lack of supply. But the solutions they are debating, they aren't just broad tax credits, they are getting incredibly surgical.
Very surgical. One of the most aggressive proposals in this amendment targets large institutional investors.
Like the big Wall Street firms.
Exactly. Following the 2008 financial crisis, massive private equity firms and corporate landlords began buying up single-family starter homes at just an unprecedented scale.
Right.
So this bill introduces a federal rule requiring these massive corporate investors to dispose of those single-family homes, selling them back to individual home buyers within a 7-year time frame.
Okay, here's my pushback on that, though. A 7-year ticking clock sounds great on a campaign flyer, but how does the federal government actually enforce that on a localized, individual property level?
Enforcement is always the catch.
Right. Because if I am a massive hedge fund managing billions in real estate, aren't I just going to shuffle those assets into thousands of decentralized, smaller LLCs to slip under the federal definition of a large institutional investor? It seems like an administrative nightmare.
You are identifying the exact enforcement loophole that lobbyists will undoubtedly try to exploit.
I mean, it seems obvious.
It does. Now, the economic mechanics of the bill attempt to bypass that by tying the 7-year clock to the beneficial ownership tracking networks established by the Treasury Department.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but the fact that the Senate is even attempting to force the liquidation of corporate real estate portfolios shows just how desperate the supply crisis has become. And they aren't stopping at corporate landlords, by the way. They are actively trying to rewrite local city planning.
Yeah, this is where it gets incredibly granular. The bill actually incentivizes sweeping local zoning reforms.
Right down to the neighborhood level.
Exactly. They want to reduce minimum lot sizes. They want to allow the subdivision of traditional single-family homes into duplexes. They are pushing for the conversion of empty post-pandemic office buildings into residential units. And perhaps most surprisingly, they are taking aim at local parking minimums.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a prime example of federal policy trying to override hyper-local bottlenecks.
How so?
Well, for decades, obscure local zoning boards have required developers to build, say, 2 off-street parking spaces for every new apartment unit.
Which sounds perfectly reasonable to anyone who has ever tried to find street parking.
It sounds reasonable until you look at the math. Okay, hit me with the math.
Land is finite and asphalt is expensive. When a developer is forced to buy extra land just to build a concrete parking lot or excavate a multi-million-dollar underground garage, those massive construction costs are immediately passed down to the renter.
So it drives up the rent.
Exactly. It artificially inflates the cost of the apartment, or worse, makes the project so expensive that the developer just decides not to build the housing at all.
Wow.
So by eliminating federal support for towns that enforce parking minimums, the Senate is trying to drastically lower the cost per square foot of building new housing supply.
That makes a lot of sense. So what does this all mean for us? We have tracked Congress fighting over multi-billion-dollar domestic security checkbooks, debating the constitutional limits of global war powers, and trying to financially engineer local zoning laws to fix a national housing shortage.
It's a heavy day.
It really is. We've seen the bitter, highly partisan, heavily litigated floor debates. But if you keep flipping through the record to the extensions of remarks and morning hour speeches, the tone whiplash is just incredible.
It is the ultimate display of the politicians' dual mandate.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they spend their afternoons sparring over the trajectory of the republic, but they spend their mornings ensuring that the achievements of their specific constituents are permanently etched into the historical record.
That is so true. For example, while not spoken on the floor, Representative Pedersen of Colorado submitted a statement emphasizing the exact kind of local pride we are talking about.
Oh, yeah?
She formally recognized the achievements of Chris and Dina Hill, the owners of Odyssey Beer Works, a craft brewery, right in Arvada, Colorado. And in the same batch of records, she honored local Winter Olympians, Stacy Gaskill and Kyle Nigamir. It's a complete pivot from federal policy to community celebration.
And we see that same localized historical preservation from other members, too.
Right.
Like, while not spoken on the floor, Representative Carter of Louisiana submitted a statement emphasizing the legacy of Edward William Brooke III.
That's a great example.
Yeah, and he didn't just list biographical facts either. He intentionally connected Brooke's legacy to the ongoing transformative power of HBCU educations in his district and across the country.
I found the morning hour highlights equally compelling. Representative Cleaver of Missouri took the floor to give an incredibly passionate tribute to 93-year-old Alvin Brooks.
Oh, that was a wonderful speech.
It really was. Brooks was being honored for holding his 300th consecutive Wednesday night Black Men's Chat in Kansas City. I mean, think about that level of dedication.
300 weeks.
300 consecutive weeks of community building, officially recognized in the exact same document debating the imminent threat of foreign adversaries.
And it isn't just local community figures getting recognized. It's recognizing unsung architects of our modern world.
Who are you thinking of?
Well, Representative Fox of North Carolina utilized her time to honor Gladys West.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she is the brilliant mathematician who spent 42 years working with the Navy, developing the unbelievably complex geodetic Earth models that directly led to the creation of the GPS technology.
The GPS we all use.
Literally every person listening to this relies on it daily.
Reading through these remarks fundamentally changes how you view the institution. I mean, it is so easy to become cynical about the geopolitical shouting matches, the failed mutinies over committee discharges, and the gridlock over housing.
It's exhausting just reading about it.
Right. But these extensions prove that these representatives are still fundamentally tethered to the ground. They are answering to the brewery owners, the local mentors, and the mathematicians in your backyard.
When you step back and look at the entirety of Wednesday, March 4, 2026, the congressional record serves as a perfect microcosm of the American experiment.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You have a governing body simultaneously wrestling with urgent global threats, battling over the very limits of its own constitutional power, attempting to engineer the economic cost of the roofs over our heads, and still finding the bandwidth to ensure a neighborhood Olympian gets their name printed in the National Archives.
It is chaotic, it is dense, and it is undeniably fascinating. And to you, the listener, remember that you have total access to all of this.
It's all public.
Exactly. You can look up the exact text of every debate, track the specific roll call vote on that 211 to 209 DHS rule, and read the full extensions of remarks for today's date, March 4, 2026, by visiting congress.gov.
This raises an important question for us to leave you with, looking at the sheer volume of text generated in a single day.
Definitely. If you look at the thousands of pages in this record, you have to wonder, if historians 100 years from now only had this single day's congressional record to understand American society, what would they conclude?
Good question.
Would they see a nation hopelessly gridlocked by global and partisan conflicts, or a people perfectly united by their fierce pride in their local communities?
A critical lens to view the process through.
Thanks for joining us, and we will see you on the next Deep Dive.